Like the thing about Americans in general is they don't realize how much the state has crushed the union movements. You know, you probably the Battle of Bear Mountain, where Union people are literally fighting the National Guard with machine guns. It's like that's how much they'll go out of their way to crush you, because America like is not this freedom project like the right describe it as. It's just a capitalist project. It's a bunch of wealthy white men who all owned absolutely huge plantations with slaves. George Washington's brother was insanely wealthy, and then they just didn't want to pay taxes. And if people want a better example of this, without all the nationalist propaganda, the Spanish settlers in the New World did the exact same thing in the 1500s. They just didn't want to pay tax anymore to the crown, and they wanted to like treat natives and treat slaves how they wanted without the Spanish interference. So that's why you have people like the Pizarro brothers who founded the colonies in Peru and stuff. They start fighting the Spanish government. Like it's not like hard. It's not like Benjamin Franklin and George Washington. All these people like the most enlightened people who ever existed were like, we just need freedom for all mankind. It's like, no, they wanted the transfer of capital, and that's like what the US has always been, like this slave
Yeah.
state. So it's not surprising that when you have movements to organize, the state crushes it time and again. And that's why the US labor movement, which could have had a similar trajectory to the British one in like the 1870s, where all these like races and ethnic groups working together, didn't work out because the state crushed it. And obviously the Red Scare in 1920 and in 1950 ensured it's basically never going to happen properly.
I will say this. I'm gonna push back just a little bit. There were some white guys that did push back against the slavery system, and although I
Do you
will,
mean generally, or do you mean the founding fathers?
well, there were some founding fathers that pushed back. I'm gonna say Hamilton, and also well, the northern states generally were they were a lot different than the South. So like in Massachusetts, a lot of black people were able to make their case using the state constitution in Massachusetts to say that every man is born free, therefore I can't be enslaved. In a lot of cases, they would win their cases.
Yeah,
But I will say this: as far as like the presidents, the few times they've actually fought for the working class people and broken from like that wealthy establishment that you're talking about, those are the people that are most vilified. So for example, Franklin Roosevelt, and of course, not a perfect guy by any means, but he's the only reason why like it's legal to have collective bargaining, because like what you were saying, before he made it okay to strike and like form a union, a lot of times when people would fight just for like an extra 30 cents of pay, like they'd be in gunfights. Like that was like common, you know.
yeah,
So I will say that. I mean, but you're right. The scary thing is though is that I do think though that the right wing in America definitely is making a lot of the arguments that the racist Southerners were making back in like the 19th century. Like a lot of times, like the way they argue, and well, now of course the real extremists, they go so far as to wave the Confederate flag. You know, so that's
yeah,
that.
yeah.
But
It's I think Trump just brought a lot of it to the surface because in terms of like the slavery thing, yeah, I'll accept that like some founding fathers might have been more enlightened, but in terms of the ones who became president, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, like some of the worst offenders in that, especially Thomas
yeah, well,
Jefferson.
Jefferson's really
Um,
bad. I'll give you that. I'm not
yeah,
going to defend Jefferson.
but then,
But go
but then,
ahead.
but also, I don't think Americans realize that most Americans don't realize that America was literally the inspiration for Nazi Germany. Like that's not like a joke or anything. That's seriously, America is the inspiration for Nazi Germany because of its race law and also because of like that I learned about in uni. There was this pseudoscience in the early 20th century that basically every American believed in. There's a guy you probably heard of him, Madison Grant, who wrote a book about Jewish people and black people, and he was palling around with presidents in terms of Teddy Roosevelt, Warren Harding, all loved his book, and Adolf Hitler said it was his Bible.
Oh
So it's
God,
just like
yeah.
all that stuff is like. I'd say the problem now is like you said about the Confederate flag, which has always been like a pretty bad problem. I'd say it's getting a bit better because at least they're removing the statues. But in terms of like America, and this goes to even like fear mongering about unions and like working class solidarity, America has never addressed its racism problem, because unlike Germany, where it literally was like, now you're going to learn about why you did this, because the
Yeah.
German education on like the Holocaust and everything is really good, because they're like, you're not going to forget why this happened and why this people did this. But with America, it's like, the natives taught people how to farm and just went away, or like some slaves could make some money and like they had quite a good life, better than in Africa or some shit like that. It's like that's actually that's in textbooks, and it
To
is
be
actually
fair,
like,
hold up, my man. To be fair, that's more like Texas. This is the thing, right? Like it's the people. Okay, so it's the people that are against like critical race theory. This is the thing, right? America is almost like two Americas. All right, like your criticism's valid in the states that have. Okay, this is
oh
this.
yeah,
You know,
I'm being very
yeah, yeah. You're
broad.
being very
Like,
broad, but it is
I've
true.
had people tell me they were told America was the inspiration for the Nazis who grew up in America. I've had people say they told that in school. So I'm being very, yeah, I'm very much talking to like the Texas, like Carolina,
Yeah,
critical race theory,
It's-
like backlash
it's
states.
the
I'm
red
not talking about
states.
like New, yeah,
yeah,
not
it's
not,
the
not
red
New York and
states. I'm
California.
just trying to be like balanced because I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Obviously, I have a bias because I'm an American, so I'm gonna defend
Yeah.
what I think is
No,
good.
I'm being very, very general. I'm not acting like every American is taught. The natives just taught me about to farm and left. I know many people, on my own community who will tell me, I was taught this in school. Like, you might be surprised, I didn't have to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and like I get like it's different based in other places, but then I'm just taking basically the worst stories I've heard from people who like, yeah, I was forced to
It
stand for
is
the Pledge
there,
of Allegiance. And blah,
but
blah,
I
blah.
think what you're saying about America never addressing the racism thing is a valid criticism, though. And I will say this, just to be fair, the bigotry issue. I'm gonna just sort of make it more broad. This country has had a big problem with bigotry because, and even in the North, and in the North it was different. So while in the North, like if you look at the 19th century, there were a lot of the Yankee Protestants. They were definitely against slavery, but then, like when poor Irish immigrants came during the whole potato famine,
Yeah.
all of a sudden a lot of serious like bigotry and a lot of like slander they would write. There were a lot of newspaper articles saying like, oh, these damn Irish, they're here just to like, you know uh, suck up all the public assistance programs. It's funny, it's like the same arguments that you hear today on like Fox.
But unlike the new immigrants, they can't assimilate because they're not white skinned. Where
Exactly.
the Irish and Italians could assimilate, because eventually it's like, well, even though we don't think you're white to start with, because English, like I've talked about this a lot in my videos, in terms of the hierarchy of racism is white Anglo-Saxon Protestants are on the top, and then below them, not Irish would have been dehumanized in a different way, but like Italians and Spanish are seen as like either they have Jewish or Muslim blood. That's why I get weirdly a lot of racist abuse on my channel, despite being pretty clearly a white guy. It's because people are like, well, you've got a dark beard and dark eyes, you must actually be blah blah blah. But then it's like eventually you kind of forget that when your country is like mainly targeting black people, Asian people, and like Hispanics. So you're like,
Right.
oh well, Italians and Irish, you can be allies with us because you're the same color skin broadly, but now we've changed it around. But America always does that. It finds a new enemy. Like who's the enemy at the moment? It's like Muslims are kind of, they're still the enemy, but like taking a bit of a back seat, because now we're focusing less on that, and now it's all about like, I don't know, migrant caravans carrying like ISIS in them or some shit like that, as per the Trump administration, like crazy shit like that. But yeah, I'd say the main thing with America, like you are totally right, like loads of Americans are very well informed on this stuff, especially the American left, who obviously, like, I'm friends with those American leftists. I know they're informed on this stuff. I will say the normalization of people like Joe Biden specifically, I think speaks to like larger problems. And by the way, I'm not on my high horse as someone, I do have an Irish background, but from the UK, I know we have like very similar problems with this stuff. But in terms of Joe Biden, it's like he's so instrumental in like the war on drugs, but more specifically the crime bill, which is like one of the most racist bills that like passed in modern times, tripled the prison population of a racist prison system. And it's like, this is now the president who's like meant to be the answer to Donald Trump's racism. It's like, also I was reading about Joe Biden being like the guy who pushed student loan debt, like, and not being able to forgive it. And it's like all this stuff together, it's like, I don't know, being an American politician is having a very good PR machine, where because you're Obama's vice president, you're the successor and you're the guy who cares about
Right.
African Americans and all that stuff. But like it's like generally, yeah, I'm not. I'm singling out America because I think it's the most visible example where people are very nationalistic, in spite of all the problems. But Britain has very similar problems, especially with the English community specifically, opposed to some of the other people in the UK. And I think generally as like Westerners, we all have to learn our history way better. It's not just Americans; it's British people as well. You know, who were all these people actually originally? Like George Washington fought for the British Army and stuff. Like these people are English
It's good
essentially.
to
So
know, yeah, like how empires run, you know. And by the way, this is why, man,